Started. Okay. So, hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly. This week with us, we had Sudhir Sakhuja, Managing Director at Coevolve, an expert in networking, SD-WAN, and all sorts telecom. So, welcome, first of all. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And would you like to give us a quick introduction about yourself, your company, what you do?
Yeah, for sure. So, my name is Sudhir Sakhuja, and I'm based out of Chicago. I am the managing director of Coevolve. I look after the Americas business. I'm responsible for P&L and the growth of the division in the Americas. And as a company, we focus on global multi-cloud deployments, including SD-WAN as well, SASE. So most of our focus is on global clients, or domestic clients who have reasonable number of sites and locations. So our objective is to provide a managed or co-managed service to them so that they can access their applications in the highest performance possible and at the lowest cost possible from the circuit costing perspective. So that's where we focus on, and happy to answer any more questions.
So, yeah, I think there's a lot of questions here, actually. So, if you don't mind, we might start with the simplest one, which is for the people who are less familiar with that kind of technology, what is SD-WAN and when it got started and what's the adoption?
Right. So SD-WAN, so Coevolve is one of the company that actually has been working on selling, implementing SD-WAN from the very beginning. So it started around, I would say around towards the mid of 2014, or maybe towards the end of 2014. And essentially SD-WAN, there are a lot of ways the SD-WANs are defined, but in very simplistic terms, it brings a lot of networking technologies together in an integrated and a packaged way to make it easy for the enterprise users to consume it. So I'll give you an example. So one of the key feature of the SD-WAN is to be able to derive excellent performance using less expensive or cost effective circuits. So around 2003 to 2004, there was still a trend for a lot of enterprise clients to use expensive MPLS links or private circuits and things like that. But what started to happen around that time is that most of their applications were starting to be either in the cloud, whether it's unified communication in the cloud or other cloud-based applications. So those private circuits were not very useful getting to the cloud. I mean, you could do private express routes and things like that, but they're generally very expensive for, especially for SMB market segment, small and medium. So what was felt in the market is that most of our traffic is going to the internet and that trend is increasing. So why do we have to depend on expensive MPLS circuits, right? So what then happened is, okay, so if you don't use MPLS circuits, then if we go with the internet circuit, the cheapest option where we get the highest bandwidth is the broadband. But then how do we make sure, how do we convince our business that going to from MPLS, which costs 4 to 10 times more depending on where the site is going to be performance is going to be comparable by using a 1/10 cost broadband circuit, even though it provides a lot of bandwidth, the performance predictability was a question. So one of the key driver for the SD-WAN around that time was to be able to, take two cost-effective circuits, let's say broadband internet, and have some innovative technologies in there that works behind the scene so that whether it is on a per packet basis or on a per flow basis, that two or more circuits, cost-effective circuits can be combined in a way not only to aggregate the bandwidth, but also to smooth out performance variations. So if one circuit is performing poorly for, let's say, 100 milliseconds, the SD-WAN allows the traffic to be seamlessly switched or packets to be seamlessly switched to the other circuit. So the end result is the user doesn't see as much performance variation as they would if they were going with a single circuit, broadband circuit, especially when they're trying to migrate away from MPLS. So that was the key, one of the key driver for SD-WAN. So essentially, there are other things in the SD-WAN, which, as I mentioned earlier, it packages a lot of different network technologies in a neat bundle. So the other was there was a pain point to activate these circuits and these sites. So in a network enterprise networking, with MPLS world, you have to typically wait 1 month or 2 months to get an MPLS circuit, and then you have to test and turn up a router. Then you have to worry about routing and then do the migration. So SD-WAN kind of wanted to make that easier because most of the circuits being used with SD-WAN are broadband circuits that can be delivered in a day or two these days, or maybe a week.
Mhm.
So one of the key other objective was to simplify the networking so that you don't have to worry about complex CLIs, you don't have to worry about complex provisioning. The objective was that once the broadband circuit is available, any user, even non-technical user, should be able to turn up a site with one click or two click. So different vendors have different ways of provisioning, but they all were going, with the focus on simplifying the networking, not just from provisioning perspective, but also then from configuration perspective. So from configuration perspective, they would, bring in predefined smart templates or configs, defaults, where the user don't have to do much. So a lot of sites that we turn up, before turning up a site, we do some design work with the client, and we spend some time to understand the design, and then we put the config in. Once the config is in, pretty much whether it's 10 sites or 100 sites, they all, the turn up becomes very easy. It takes 20 minutes, 15 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes. So the whole objective here is to not only provide the application the performance that they need using cost-effective circuits, but also in the process simplify the networking, both from implementation as well as ongoing config management perspective. So that's SD-WAN. And we have seen over the last 6, 7 years, there were concerns initially whenever there is a new technology. If I look back 6, 7 years, whenever there is a new technology, the enterprise take a little bit of time to see the proof and trust the technology. So we did one of our earliest, and I think probably the industry first, real global deployment of SD-WAN, where the client understandably was not very comfortable migrating away from MPLS to broadband circuits using SD-WAN, even though there were cost savings. And their main reason for their concern was the unified communication, voice over IP type traffic, which they were concerned the SD-WAN and broadband combination may not be able to handle. So at that time, I'm going back 6 years ago, to keep the client comfortable, we designed a hybrid solution where, one circuit could be MPLS and the other could be broadband. At the very least, reduce the cost of one circuit and increase the available bandwidth at the site. But what ended up happening is once we were doing the deployment, during the deployment, the client had a test scenario where they wanted to test just with the broadband without MPLS, and that testing during the pilot and deployment proved to be so good, in many cases better than the MPLS performance, that eventually the client decided to just remove the MPLS and go with 100% broadband internet type solution. So there is a lot of good things in the SD-WAN technology, especially if you're looking into how to reduce the circuit cost. That's one driver. The other key driver is, a lot of clients are doing cloud projects these days. So a lot of clients either have just migrated to Office 365 as an example, or in the process of doing that. So what happens is all of a sudden when you enable all these collaboration, cool, media-rich tools, all of a sudden your bandwidth demand goes up from a site.
Yeah.
So what happens is now maybe they were fine with T1 MPLS circuit before, but now all of a sudden because of this cloud adoption and Office 365 deployments, they need 3 times, 4 times bandwidths in many cases, because the whole idea to go there is to increase media-rich collaborations, video conferencing more often, and things like that. So the other key driver that I think the enterprises should look for is, even if your performance is good, your MPLS cost is good, you have to think about the future. If you're in the middle of deploying cloud-based applications like Office 365, or collaboration, media-rich applications, unified communications, then you have to consider the bandwidth. And the easiest, cheapest, cost-effective way to augment a bandwidth at the site is to bring in a high-speed broadband circuit, which can be had for business-grade broadband, can be had for $100 a month here in the US in most cases, and then let SD-WAN, combine the bandwidth and then derive the performance out of it. So I think that's where the SD-WAN plays a role in the unified communication and the cloud adoption.
Nice. So there's a lot there to unpack. So I'll start by asking a few questions which are very pertinent to what SignalWire does, and what our customer base does too. So the idea with SD-WAN is essentially you will be shifting to the networking layer some of the not even issues, challenges that we're usually trying to handle at the application layer, if I'm not mistaken. So in many cases, you end up having one server that's in the East Coast, one server is in the West Coast, one server is in Canada, one server is in Mexico, then you have servers in Europe, etc. And you're generally trying, whatever that trying is, there's many ways to do it, to route your traffic to either the closest or the cheapest node. And that's something that's very, I would say, complicated for many application developers. So the first thing I see here, and correct me if I got this completely wrong, is that SD-WAN will allow us or anybody using our services even to shift the burden of figuring out where to send the traffic to the network layer, which is more efficient and transparent to the application. The application will just find out it's just faster and will be happier, but we'll know what happened.
Exactly. So not only that, it makes it easier for you to put the configs in the network to route the traffic one way or the other without getting into CCIE level commands and things like that. But not only that, it also can make those decisions intelligently. So if you program the network, so the whole idea of software defined is it's software based, so you can program it to do a lot of things. So if it's intelligent in a way that if you put a policy saying, okay, I have two paths to get to that application endpoint, two different ways to get there, it can figure out what's the best path in a real-time basis to get there to ensure the application performance is maintained to the extent possible, right? Now, if
Hmm.
all of your paths are having problems, then yeah, there's no way out. But the whole idea here is to maximize the infrastructure that you have and find the best path based on the application SLAs. So different, and you can define different SLAs or objectives, SLA objectives for different type of applications. So for example, a real-time application, unified communication, voice over IP, things like that, they don't generally need a whole lot of bandwidth, but what they need is successful packet delivery. Otherwise, the voice quality would visibly start to or audibly start to suffer. So you could put an application SLA on the SD-WAN in a very simple way, saying once you detect any voice over IP or RTP type traffic, your objective is to maximize the performance. And when I say maximize the performance, specifically reduce the jitter and reduce the packet loss, right?
Yeah.
So then the SD-WAN for that type of traffic is behaving in a different way. In the same network, same site, there could be people doing a Dropbox file download. The SD-WAN is intelligent with some predefined default policies to know the box objective is to maximize the bandwidth, not necessarily, reduce the jitter, right? So it will handle the box.com or any file transfer traffic in a different way. So all of these things, are packaged in SD-WAN very neatly. And the key objective, as I said earlier, is to make the config interface so simple that people actually start to use it. All of these things were available in different licenses, different products before in networking, before SD-WAN came along. But the challenge was they were disjointed, expensive, isolated components. Only a large enterprise could afford to bring them together and buy them and operate them seamlessly. SD-WAN has kind of provided all of those things in a package that can be consumed not just by the large enterprise, but also medium and small enterprises and still get the same benefits. Make sense?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And so let's make maybe a practical example. You mentioned jitter and packet loss, which is the ban of all things media. So companies have certainly been using a lot more video communications as of late. So what you said is that using SD-WAN, you might be able to either prioritize the video traffic so people have a better quality video, or is it possible to do things like prioritize them based on other rules, such as if there's no video traffic, then the Dropbox guy can use as much bandwidth as they want? Or will they always be limited to some limit you set?
No, it can be done both ways. In most of the
Mhm.
deployments, it's done in the second way you defined, where prioritize voice traffic if it exists. If it doesn't exist, let everybody The other applications use the full bandwidth. So that's the most of the deployments we do are like that. Now, I know in some cases, especially if you're coming from MPLS world, you're used to carving out, the gold class of service, and that bandwidth is dedicated for voice. So that usually is now how it's deployed in the SD-WAN. There are intelligent business policies that adjust and adapt, not only based on the link or circuit performance conditions, but also based on which applications are currently driving on the network.
That's very interesting. Okay, so this is a question I very often ask guests because it's always interesting. What size of company will benefit from your solution? Like, is there a minimum size number of sites where it will make sense, or you think even a smaller company that currently has, I don't know, well, let's say, I mean, smaller meaning at least a couple offices. I mean, of course, it's not a home office. Will anyone benefit from an SD-WAN solution, or is there a minimum size where it starts to make sense?
Right. So the benefit of the SD-WAN solution is can vary, and even for small, medium, and large, all segments. And we have clients with few sites. We have clients with few hundred sites.
Hmm.
So specifically where the Coevolve strengths are, we focus on medium to larger end of the enterprise. Now we do have some smaller, like 4 or 5 site clients as well, because there are other use cases that were driving the use for SD-WAN for them. But one of the focus area for us is to have our personal Coevolve strength is when there are 15, 20 plus sites, and it becomes even better if some of those sites are outside the US, some global presence, because what happens is it's very easy to justify the SD-WAN project if there are some MPLS expensive circuits in the mix. Okay, so there are two type of
Mhm.
buyers that we come across. One is well aware of SD-WAN benefits, and they're due for network refresh and they want to go to SD-WAN, regardless of. There are other buyers who say, okay, we have a network which is meeting our current needs. We need to do some ROI calculations as to whether we should do SD-WAN or not. Because those are the kind of the buyers who generally are a little behind on the cloud adoption. So they have no desire to have excess bandwidth and all those things that we talked about earlier immediately. So those kind of clients, they're hearing a lot about SD-WAN and they want to see, okay, should we go to SD-WAN? In those kind of use cases, it becomes very easy to cost justify the SD-WAN if there is at least one global site or an expensive MPLS circuit, which usually
Mhm.
in a global, if you have a global site, you would most likely have an
Yeah,
expensive
that
MPLS
definitely.
circuit.
That's
Yeah.
gonna be very common. Yeah, something I was looking at. So, from an introduction standpoint, say I have a company with 5 or 6 sites, and I would like to get started. Do I need actual hardware, or do you provide the hardware? Do you have a managed solution? I understand might be a dumb question from someone that doesn't really know, but uh, do you need actual specialized hardware deployed to your data centers, or is it just software that gets deployed?
Could be either. So the
Hmm.
product that we focus on from SD-WAN perspective mostly is the VMware SD-WAN. So I'll give answer specific to VMware SD-WAN. The other SD-WAN products are similar. So you could deploy a software-based router or SD-WAN appliance, virtual appliance, running VMware ESXi or other virtualization platforms, and you get the same benefit. Or you could, buy the subscription based on your bandwidth requirements. And as part of that subscription, we provide not just the software license and management, but also the hardware that goes hand in hand with that. So those hardwares are VMware or Dell branded, and based under the hood, there are x86 type platform running, pre-packaged software. So you could do either or. Most of the clients that I've come across, they go with the subscription option because the hardware kind of comes as a pre-packaged, and they don't have to worry about configuring or managing or looking into virtualization at each and every branch. But there are some use cases where the virtualized SD-WAN appliance is very useful. One particular example is if there is a data center and the client does not have rack space to put a new appliance, which is very common these days. So then in that case, they have a virtualization platform. We could run SD-WAN software in their data center without installing a new appliance.
Hmm. Okay, so that's possible both ways.
Hmm.
That's really interesting because what this brings to mind is this is not just for client companies. So I don't know how to phrase this. So SignalWire is a service provider.
Hmm.
We will use this ourselves, even, right? That will be a good a good fit, even. So
Right.
because we will be able to save something on bandwidth, save something on. But here's a question. So everybody knows SignalWire is deployed to multiple clouds, to multiple cloud providers because of various reasons. SD-WAN is also capable of bridging between providers, I suppose. And can you create cost-based tables so you can get some type of bandwidth going one way, some type of other bandwidth going the other way, etc.? Because as you know, there's large differences in quality, but also cost between the four major cloud providers. So we do a lot of that, but it's all manual. I'm thinking we might actually save time there.
Right. Yeah, you could put those policies very
Mhm.
easily in the SD-WAN environment. And we have actually some service providers that focus on voice over IP and unified communications that use the SD-WAN platform for, one main reason, that if a client has, it's a manufacturing client and their internet circuits are known to have less than optimal performance, but they want the unified benefit of unified communication from the cloud. So they would propose the SD-WAN as part of the package of their unified offering. When they sense that the circuits may not be of optimal quality to provide the service, so SD-WAN becomes part of their offering in those cases, and they would recommend SD-WAN in those cases as well to the clients, their clients and clients.
Hmm. So that's really interesting, and it's going to be even more important in one case. I was looking at your website, looking at the collaborations you do, etc., and I noticed you've been doing a lot with edge computing, which is also something we've been focusing on recently. So does SD-WAN make it easier to deploy edge computing resources? Mostly because I'm speaking from experience. It's not very hard, but it's also not super easy because a lot of the things that go on edge networking capabilities are sometimes limited, or there's a policy in place that prevents, for example, there's one edge provider that somehow doesn't support UDP egress out from nodes. So we're not able to send UDP out of nodes. We have to find a solution for that. But it's I'm wondering if overlaying something like SD-WAN could save all of that work and just you just talk to the SD-WAN and it takes care of it.
Right. So the real answer is that's where the industry is heading. Currently, I don't think they're there yet. Okay, so to give you an example, you could do, edge compute in the sense of you can install a separate network component on the SD-WAN platform. Like if you want to install a separate firewall, you can put a virtual instance of the firewall on the SD-WAN platform. But as of today, they're not open for all kind of workloads. But that's where they're heading. That's where they're heading. So foundationally, everything is in there. I don't think the market has gotten to that point of execution yet. They're definitely heading in that direction where you could have the SD-WAN not just for SD-WAN kind of use case, but also, like IoT use case. You could have IoT server edges sitting there, IoT compute sitting in there. So that's where they're heading pretty soon.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. The issue we ran into, well, it's not even an issue, is that we deploy media servers. So what SignalWire does is take the media and do something with it, compose the video, do speech recognition, do other types of AI learning, machine learning stuff on it, and deploying that to the edge means we can actually cut down latency quite a
Correct.
lot. That
Right.
does come with a cost. So yeah, that this is an interesting question. Does so this is a trick question. I know the answer, but does all the SD-WAN overlay cost you in terms of latency? And how does it not cost you in terms of latency? Because one will think, I already have my own network. If I'm adding stuff on top of it that parses through my traffic and tries to send it in different places, it's going to be slower, but I suppose that's not the case. So how does that not add overhead?
So you may sacrifice, I would say, 2% of bandwidth because
Mhm.
of the encapsulation overhead, and also SD-WAN measures the performance of each path very frequently, 100 milliseconds or so. So there's some overhead in measurements and all that. But in terms of the latency, to answer your question, maybe 1 millisecond for
Oh,
compute. For compute, because these days these devices, the SD-WAN x86 platform, they use a feature called DPDK, which basically gives them the ability to process the packets and encrypt the packets in as good as a Cisco router or any ASIC based purpose-built router would do. So the industry, the reason SD-WAN uses a lot of standard hardware x86 platform is because of those kind of features that Intel and other processors have added to enable their processor not just for the use case of compute but also for processing the packets or network devices use case. So not a noticeable impact to the latency, maybe 2% impact, up around 2% on the bandwidth. But then again, the use case here is to have broadband. So usually clients are, going from a T1 to all of a sudden 200, 300 meg circuit. So
oh, I see. So
that's never been a, right. Yeah,
yeah, you would
that's never
probably
been a,
notice if you were really, really convinced you wanted to measure something, but then it's really not about the performance itself. Well, 2% bandwidth and a few milliseconds are a very
yeah.
good thing, I would say. Especially since these days you can reasonably expect to have sub 50 millisecond latency if your network is built well. So 50 or 52 won't matter too much. It's not.
Yeah, and these days with the emphasis on the security and all the news that we all read,
Oh yeah.
the encryption has almost become a necessity. So I have not had a situation where the client has questioned that you're adding 1 millisecond, 2 millisecond because you're encrypting the packet. It's been the other way around. They want the encryption regardless of whatever impact it has.
So this is something we actually haven't touched on, but because we probably both know, but maybe someone in the audience doesn't know. All traffic going through an SD-WAN is effectively encrypted, correct?
All traffic going out of the SD-WAN. So you get the traffic from the LAN side. So use a LAN,
Mm-hmm.
then it gets to the SD-WAN. Then any private traffic, meaning traffic going to your other sites, is encrypted. There's no other way. We don't send it any other way. Traffic going out straight to the internet could be encrypted if it's going through a gateway, SD-WAN gateway,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be sent directly, meaning we don't touch the encryption.
Well, of course, it
That's
depends on
based.
what the
That's
rules are,
yeah.
but
That and
internally,
that's
it's
been
like a super VPN.
it is. It is. It's not just a fully encrypted VPN, but it's also intelligent VPN because we are deciding which path to send the traffic based on the real-time performance and what application SLAs and objectives were defined.
Well, it really sounds like it's a great technology all around. I think I'm going to look into a few things myself because honestly, I am you can tell I am an application developer. I am solutions architect, center. So I build stuff that lives one layer below what we've been discussing. And you made me think of all sorts of things where I'd rather not have to deal with myself, and
Exactly.
instead I could just have my network do it for me, which is
Right.
in a sense it's similar to what you get with using containers. It's not this, I mean, it's completely unrelated, but using containers makes you not have to worry about your machines. They will just work,
Right.
they're just there and they just do things. And using SD-WAN effectively will give me the same thing, only in the other side. So that's really
Right.
fantastic. I mean, I well, I mean, I thank you very much for this discussion because I learned a lot. I think our audience learned a lot too. And that's what it is for today. We're at Sudhir Sakhuja, uh, with Coevolve and managing director there, and he gave us a good rundown of what an SD-WAN is for people like myself who didn't really know, and what an SD-WAN can do for your company, and all sorts of interesting things that can be done with it, including things that are very relevant to our use cases, such as the video applications and that kind of other stuff. So, well,
Excellent.
thank you so much for joining us today. It was just great,
Thank you. Thank you to you, and thank you everyone. Cheers.
and I'll see you next week.